Hello and welcome to the MADEcast, the official podcast of the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment. It's a series of lectures on video game history as part of the MADE's ongoing effort to preserve this history through teaching and displaying playable exhibits of rare games and consoles.
While life in the time of COVID has forced us to close our doors, the support of people like you has allowed us to continue to bring history to you through lectures like the one you will hear in a few minutes. I'm Chun.
I'm Miles.
And I'm Red. This week, we are honored to sit down with Joe Decuir, one of the creators of the Atari 2600. In it, we are going to talk. We will hear Alex talk about that process, his story developing that, and the Atari 800 computer and that interface, as well as everything else. It'll be a great interview. Joe Decuir has had a lot of big influence on computer engineering throughout the entire thing in computer science. He helped establish the USB standards and the earlier computers, USB 1.0 and 1.1, as well as some Bluetooth standards. So it'll be interesting to hear his perspective from basically from the inside as the inside gets. But as far as that, we will get into some news of the day and then what we are playing. The only little bit of news, one of the only little bits of news that I got today is that it was Mario's 35th birthday recently. So that is a big happy birthday to you, Mario.
Happy birthday, Mario.
Happy birthday.
And as far as Nintendo celebrating, Nintendo released Super Mario Brothers 35, which is in a sense a battle royale Mario game. There is 35 online players in a party. You are completing Mario stages in effect and just jumping on the heads of all the Goombas and all the other enemies and sending them to the other players, and you just want to be the last one standing out of 35 in order to be the last one and be the winner. So that's an interesting take on a Mario Battle Royale. So in the meantime,
I think that is a really good concept for a Mario game. Like, we've seen a lot of sort of multiplayer Marios where everyone's on the same stage and, jumping, and it's whoever gets there first. But this sort of being more explicitly antagonistic is really sort of an interesting new approach to it. I'm interested to see how it stands out.
You know what we call those kind of games? We call it Friendship Destroyer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are, it's most definitely a friendship destroyer, especially because you can deliberately send enemies to a specific player.
Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah.
I already heard scream and some swear in my brain if I'm going to play it with my friends.
Yeah, just ear-splitting screams.
Yeah.
It's going to end up as bad as Mario Kart.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I bet it's probably worse because
Kart.
you're literally sending stuff to there.
Oh, man. We'll see. And don't get me started with Mario Kart, though. That's a whole nother bag of worms.
Yeah. I'm very bad at driving, too, so I'm always the one who loses. Even if I win, someone will always get a blue shell on me. I don't know why. I mean, it just happened.
RNG.
No, I love playing Mario Kart.
Yeah, RNGesus just wasn't on your side that day.
Yep.
Yeah.
In other news, as we approach December and the end of the year, we're getting into Game Awards season. So the Game Awards will be taking place on December 10th. December 20th. One of those numbers is right. Just cut to the one that's right.
I think it's a 10.
Leave that.
December 10th.
Yeah.
And while voting is still open, we are just going to go down the line of Game of the Year nominations. So first up is Doom Eternal from id Software / Bethesda. I played that and I absolutely adored it. Final Fantasy VII, the remake from Square Enix.
Gorgeous game. Loved it myself.
I vote for that.
Ghost of Tsushima from Sucker Punch.
That's a beautiful game.
Yeah, I've been meaning to pick that up. It looks like exactly the kind of game I'd love.
It's another one on the top of the list.
I think the strategy that they're releasing a single player game first and then giving multiplayer update is really good. I mean, it's a DLC, but it doesn't require you to pay anymore. So I think it's a pretty good strategy. And
Yeah,
I
agree.
I would see someone is probably gonna do it after that too. So
It will be an interesting one to see, like online cinematic battles with multiple samurai.
I wonder if it's going to be sort of more strictly duels, or if it's going to be sort of open world, just Ghost of Tsushima but multiplayer.
Yeah, that'll be
it's like a raid. It's like a dungeon.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a pretty different art style and background together with the main story of the game. The main story is more realistic. It's more traditional Japanese samurai, but the other one is like you're killing yokai. Yeah,
Okay.
That'll be good.
Yeah, that's a difference of it.
interesting.
Continuing down the list with one of the indie games is Hades from Supergiant, Local Boys.
Amazing game. Highly recommend. I've been playing that recently. I can't recommend it enough. I haven't had this much fun playing a roguelike like this in a very long time. This is as enjoyable as it gets, and we can talk about it a little more later. But it's I'll set aside some time, but it's fantastic. The sound is amazing. Everything about it is super fun, and it meshes really well together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Next is... Sorry, go on.
no, you go.
Next is Animal Crossing New Horizons from Nintendo.
I
love that game.
I know they will, with the amount of time they've spent in that game, that's what they're voting for. At least
It's something is tired just to save the world or fighting monster every day or just shooting someone. It's very good to have some place to take a rest. I mean, sometimes I'm really tired in real life, and I just don't want to put any other duty on me. I'm not gonna save the world if I'm tired. I mean, it's a really good place for me to take a rest, and sometimes even it's really a precious place for times like now in the COVID when we can't meet some people that we used to meet, or maybe we are just in different countries so that we can't meet each other.
Some people were questioning how perfect the release of New Horizons was with the lockdown. Like, everybody's staying home, so we can make you go outside in the outside world with islands and cute little animals.
It's the right game in right time and right places, and they have done a lot of amazing works in terms of audio and other game design, and they're really updating it almost every few months, I think, and they're still updating, I think, and it's all free as soon as you have bought the game, of course.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And the scale of releasing new stuff is pretty good. I mean, like, they really have a new area, like you can go out of the sea and they will have new stuff. So it's a pretty good game to play with friends.
Mm-hmm. It's just good, clean, wholesome, very just pleasant. And we need more games like that, I think.
Yeah.
Pleasant is a great word. Another small bit of news. Before you get into the news, I think there's one more Game of the Year nominee.
The last Game of the Year nominee is going to be The Last of Us Part 2 from Naughty Dog.
That is an amazing story that can also breed a lot of discussion. Not suitable for this podcast, for this PG rated podcast. So
we'll leave
it's
the
an
fire.
Excellent, interesting, mature story.
Yes, and that's as far as we will go for the moment.
We'll leave the discussion back to those Reddit or somewhere else.
Yes. Exactly. We'll let them take care of it. But I think that's enough of the news for the day. Other than there is a new, I believe it's called Katamari Damacy Reroll, basically a remastered Katamari being released on on Switch, PS4, and Xbox One. Highly recommend everybody check that out if you want another peaceful game that's not necessarily. I mean, it's more goofy than the nice piece of Animal Crossing, but the gameplay is incredibly satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very typical game on Nintendo. I mean, Nintendo is very good at making games that are not that intense to make player really be able to take a rest. And I think the Katamari game is quite a classic game in that kind of genre too. I think they have made a step on the
It's
history.
very unique. I can't think of any game that really does what Katamari does from a gameplay style.
Very
it's
true.
It's
very
fun.
unique.
It's just very fun.
And it's very fun, yeah.
It would be interesting to see another game made with the Katamari engine. Just having the entire rolling mechanics and going around. I can think of a couple anime characters that engine might be useful for. But in the meantime, I think we should let Alex get on with his interview with the wonderful Joe Decuir. We would like to thank him for his time very much for this. Without further ado, here is Joe Decuir and Alex in interview.
Enjoy.
Hello and welcome back. This is Alex Handy here. I am incredibly honored to have Joe Decuir here. Joe is responsible for the Atari 2600, the Atari 8-bit computer, and the Amiga, but we're only going to be talking about the Atari today. Thank you for being here.
You
Joe.
should know that success has 1,000 fathers, failure is an orphan. I contributed to all of those things. I was not the only contributor.
Certainly, no. There were numerous other people involved. Obviously,
Yes,
you want to shout out to the people that maybe don't get named all the time.
It would take a long time. Obviously, in all three cases, I was an apprentice to Jay Miner, rest his soul. But lots and lots of other people contributed. Let's keep going.
Well, let's talk about Jay Miner. I mean,
okay.
What I like to talk about here on this podcast is context. So how did you come to know Jay? What made you guys get along? Where did this all start?
Let's start a little bit farther back. So I was in 1975. I'm working in medical research. I'm applying to medical school, and I'm working at a research hospital in San Francisco. But they ran out of money to fund the study we were doing on shock lung. So I was given 2 months' notice that they were going to lay me off. So I had to look for another job. I looked for and found 2 jobs. I found one job with a medical electronics company in Orange County, California, where I was going to be their microprocessor expert. I was a student of microprocessors at the time. I'd already worked on it, and
can I just interrupt real quick? Microprocessors were brand new at the time. I mean, this was super cutting edge.
They first came out in 1971. I took my first class in microprocessors in 1973. My first engineering job from 73, 74 was working on adapting interfaces to intensive care monitoring equipment to mini computers.
Wow.
So I was learning computer architecture. I understood microprocessor programming, so I could do that sort of stuff. So it was an attractive idea to move back to Orange County, which is driving range from my parents in L.A., because the surf is really good. I spent the 60s as a surfer. I've gained a few pounds since then. So that was one of the possibilities, but I also networked through my buddies, and a buddy of mine knew somebody at Atari, and they were looking for somebody to help out with some video game thing. And luckily for me, I had learned a little bit about video games that summer. I had learned to play tank at Disneyland in Anaheim. So I got called in in fact, it was 45 years ago this week. I was interviewed over the Thanksgiving weekend in Los Gatos. And I think I saw Jay, but I was mostly interviewed by a bunch of people from Atari Coin-Op. And obviously, I didn't know it. Have you heard the expression, luck favors the prepared mind?
Well, now I have.
So I had been studying microprocessors in my copious free time. And I had actually gone to WestCon, where the 6502 was introduced. And that's my card from getting into WestCon.
Joe is showing me his actual card at this point.
So I had studied the microprocessor, which I didn't realize that they had chosen.
I mean,
for this new machine.
I want to even ask, why did you learn about microprocessors? I mean, that must have been the most cutting edge, coolest thing that could possibly have been.
Because it was cutting edge and coolest thing.
What got you?
You know, I studied EECS and pre-med, and my curiosity about, electrical engineering, computer science led to microprocessors. Obviously, I'd say the biggest contribution of engineers to the 20th century was the computer. And we went from the mainframe style machines and the special purpose things in World War II down to microprocessors in only 25 years. And they had gotten down to the point where we had a 4-bit microprocessor in P-channel. And that came out the year before I graduated from Berkeley. And already, a few years later, we have an 8-bit microprocessor that runs a lot faster, that was only going to cost $25 a piece in onesies. So I thought, I can afford one. And I went and bought one myself, plus the manuals. I don't have the chip anymore, but I still have the manuals. Wow. So the point is, luck favors a prepared mind. I had studied the microprocessor that Atari had already chosen for this new machine. Now, unsung heroes or sung heroes, Steve Mayer and Ron Milner, who worked at Atari up at their think tank in Cyan Engineering, had conceived of this thing. And so they were looking for somebody to come up and A, help get it to work, and B, to take that design with me back from Nevada City, California, to Los Gatos, California. Their experience was they would invent something new, and then they would send it to the people in Los Gatos who would say, not invented here, and forget about it. So they wanted to have somebody come up, get it to work, stick it in his head, send me back down to get it built. That was the story of that process. And like I say, not only was I self-prepared on the processor that I didn't know that they had chosen yet, but I had played a video game already. So when they were walking me out through the lobby, here's a bunch of Atari video games with no coin slots. And they say, you want to play one? And I thought, I bet you they're going to decide whether to hire me or not. And I looked around the room and I noticed an Atari tank, and I had played that summer. So I said, I just walked over to the Atari tank and looked at it, and they said, you like to play tank? And I said, yeah. So I played 3 games, passable. I won one of the 3. Yeah. And they must have thought, that's a hire. So I was hired pretty much on the spot.
Now, I think another thing that we have to say for our podcast listeners here in this new generation is that you say, yes, I'd played a video game. That was actually a rare kind of thing in, 75? So...
Oh, yes. I mean, the first video games were patented in 1968. The first ones were shipping. The Magnavox Odyssey in 1972. In fact, Nolan Bushnell pirated the design of the Magnavox Odyssey to make Pong. That's another story for another day. So, yes, those were quite rare at that time.
I mean, you were a rare bird walking into there, like having experience with the microprocessor. Probably only a few people on Earth had that experience.
At that time in history, yes. Berkeley was one of the first schools to teach a class in the 4004, which was 2 years after it was first introduced. Mm-hmm. And I took that class and I aced it.
And that's, you're very correct, and the fortune favors the prepared mind.
there was also a huge amount of luck, right? But there I was. So I got hired by Atari, and I first of all went to work for Mayer and Minor up in Cyan Engineering, and they had designed but not debugged that original prototype. I got it to work, and so they introduced upper management to come up and see it in February of that year, and they came up and they were impressed, and they said, "You're moving on down." So I left the apartment.
Apartment.
I was staying in a hotel, basically. So I moved down to an apartment in Los Gatos and started working for Jay Miner. So I get to finally work with Jay Miner beginning of March 1976. I got to sit down with him. And he was a lot older than I was. Of course, I was 25 and he was 50-ish. And bearded, really friendly guy, square dancer. And I remember talking about this stuff, and he's the one who told me that success has 1,000 fathers, failure is an orphan.
Mm-hmm.
I got that from him. So I hooked up with him as the apprentice. I was hired both because I understood enough hardware to be dangerous and enough software to be dangerous. And so the contributions that I made to that machine had a lot to do with recognizing how we could move some functions from hardware into software and move other functions from software into hardware.
A lot of the people I see talking about the Atari 2600 say that the television is actually an extension of the console, right? Like
Yes.
it's very much a piece of it. It's not just this drawing palette with frame buffers.
Right. And yes, it has no frame buffer. It only has a line buffer. I think the Spectrum ZX is the only other instance of a machine that only had a line buffer, not a frame buffer. And so we were making it really simple and cheap because the 6502 was fast enough to keep up with the horizontal lines as it was writing down the screen, rather than having hardware that mapped a big piece of memory to the screen. And we did this to be cheap because at that time in history, enough memory to cover the screen was going to be a lot of dough. But in retrospect, and I say this in retrospect, we inadvertently put the video in the hands of the programmers, who turned out to be a lot more clever than we realized. We expected that machine to have a 2 or 3 year shelf life. It sold for at least 10 years, at least 30 million units. It was more successful than we realized.
It was a remarkable feat of engineering, and then the TIA chip and the processor itself. There's an interesting saying in sort of the emulation community. People are like, "Oh, 2600, that should be easy to emulate. Why can't you do it?" Right? And it's like they have no idea.
No. As a matter of fact, as an aside, here I am, 43 years after it shipped, and as a teacher of students, I have students who are working on building field programmable gate array emulations of the TIA chip. A late buddy of mine, Kurt Vendel, built one of these for a descendant of Atari and shipped it as a Flashback 2.0 back in 2007, sometime back in the 2000s. And it sold 1 million units.
Unbelievable.
But that was a hardware emulation, not an ARM CPU assembly code emulation. Nowadays, all the TIA emulators are software emulation because the software is way too fast.
Yeah, but the to really get it accurate and to draw it the same way that it was to render it the same way it was being rendered, you have to emulate like an analog system and the digital system interfacing.
Right. Well, mercifully, I still have the schematics.
So I also wanted to talk about the 8-bit Atari computer, since we're almost
Yes.
halfway through this already.
Right.
How did that project get started?
Well, first of all, we knew that there would need to be a follow-on, because we knew that if you don't replace your your products, other people will. Once you have gone to the trouble of proving that there's a market there, you're going to attract lots of competition. We knew that was going to happen. So the interesting problem that we had with our next machine was, is this going to be the next great game machine, or is this going to be a personal computer? And what we wound up doing, to make a long story short, was both. We built one chipset and we packaged it two ways. We were planning to build a machine that wasn't originally going to have a keyboard, that eventually became the Atari 400, that had the same great animation capability beyond the 2600. And then we were going to take the same chipset and package it differently with a full-stroke keyboard, expansion buses, etc., etc., and that became the Atari 800. What happened was Doug Neubauer, one of the chip designers on the team, he designed the Pokey chip. He got done designing the Pokey chip and he got kind of bored, and so he wrote the killer game application, a killer original game for that platform, and it was called Star Raiders. And Star Raiders needed a keyboard to play. And it was so good, so powerful, that marketing decided that we had to put in a chiclet, a sort of a touch-sensitive keyboard on the 400 so you could play Star Raiders. Mm-hmm. So we wound up with two machines, same insides, different outsides. And that machine sold about 5 million units.
The iconic thing that I always think of for the 8-bits Atari computers is the robot walking demo, which would run in the stores, right? Like, I mean, it was sort of an eye-catching thing. It was really quite a powerful machine for its day.
Well, people have built the bouncing ball demo from Amiga, and it now also runs on the Atari 8-bits.
That's crazy. I mean, there are still people out there doing demo scene stuff for it. I mean, all of your stuff is still being programmed for.
There's a conference, I think it's in Poland every year, and so there's a big retro scene for that. I get a newsletter in German from a club that's headquartered in where's the town? It's in, the newsletter's in German, which means I need to learn to read technical German. Because there's a huge club scene and demo scene more in Europe than in the United States. But it's still popular.
Very much so.
And then the Amiga came along.
Well, what have you seen in the demo scene, or people who have later found things to do with your hardware that has really impressed you?
The thing that impresses me most is quite modern. A buddy of mine, Tom Cherryholmes, who lives in Austin, Texas, he and his buddies have built a machine called the FujiNet. And you basically take an Arduino family machine called the ESP32. It has a 32-bit CPU. It has built-in Bluetooth and Wi-Fi in it. And they've hooked it up to the Atari serial bus. I'll get to the serial bus later. But the Atari 8-bits were designed by people who were aware of how OS 360 worked. So the insides of the Atari 8-bit computers was professionally designed but scaled to meet that platform. And it was designed to be extensible. So as a software and as a hardware effort, Thomas and his buddies have built basically a Wi-Fi adapter that hangs off of the Atari serial bus. And then they've hacked the Atari OS. They've extended it in the standard ways so that there's now an end device. So here's a microcomputer with, 8-bit processor, 1.8 megahertz, not 1.8 gigahertz. I'm sitting in front of a computer that's got a quad-core Intel architecture that runs on 64 bits wide, that runs at 1.8 gigahertz. This is a processor that's radically narrower and radically slower, and they're trying to write web browsers.
Have they succeeded?
Sort of. they have written some tools that run over networks, and so they're now setting up to sell through the hardware and software community these Fuji nets. I did some testing on one of them. It works, which means that they're building up a network of people who are connected with these retro machines 41 years after we first shipped it.
That's amazing.
Now, the interesting thing about all this is that the complexity is, they're so simple compared to modern machines that a person can actually understand what's going on. And if I had copious free time, which I don't, what I would like to do is finish the book on the Atari 8-bit computers. I was working on it for the MIT Press. There's already one on the 2600
Racing the Beam.
called Racing the Beam.
Wonderful book.
And there's one on the Amiga called The Future Was Here. I want to finish the one in the middle on the Atari 8-bitters. I would call it Encore, Atari's second system. And the reason I want to write, one of the reasons I want to write this is I want to explain to people how to program the Atari 8-bits. Because if you want to write a video game in today's market, the rendering engines are astonishingly complicated. It takes tens, if not hundreds, of man-years to create a new game in today's environment. But I want to enable artists to create their own simple retro games where it's simple enough that you can actually understand it and write a new game in like a season. This is already happening. Atari Age, actually markets video games by people writing for the 2600. And they might also market games written for the Atari 8-bits. So there's still some people creating in this space and some people consuming in this space. And of course, in this space now, you can not only try to get your hands on the old hardware to play the old games, but you can run emulations on PCs, you could run it on Mac OS, you could probably run it on Linux implementations. So there's a lot of people playing the emulators because they're a whole lot easier to get your hands on. Right?
Yep.
And if, like I say, if I had free time, which I don't, I would want to support this community of digital artists and their customers.
Well, that these devices you have designed are artistic mediums, and they will live on forever.
We realized that was one of the huge lessons that we learned when we sort of did an internal postmortem on the 2600. We realized that we had created a canvas for artists who were much more talented than we gave them credit for. I think of the amazing brand new games created for that platform, like River Raid, which did vertical scrolling, like Pitfall, which moved horizontally, like Yar's Revenge, like Adventure. Adventure just still to this day sort of blows me away. If and when I finish writing this book on the Atari 8-bits, I have Warren Robinette's permission to port his adventure game to the 8-bits.
That would be amazing. Unfortunately, our time is up today, Joe. I would love to have you
That's
on
fine.
again at some future date. Thank you so much for all you've done, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for listening to the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment's official podcast. If you've any thoughts, questions, corrections, or general museum ideas, shoot us an email at info@themade.org. We'd like to send out a big thank you to everyone who donated recently and to our Patreon supporters who keep the Made afloat. Patreon donors get to listen to this podcast 1 week before it's released on major streaming services, and we will continue that with future episodes every week. Till then, I am Alex, also Red.
I'm Chen.
And I'm Miles. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.